from Daikaiju Network, where we have a healthy obsession with kaiju. I am your co-host, Kent, and with me is your other co-host,
Jason. How's it going, peeps?
So this one and only podcast episode that we're doing for the month of May in the year of our Lord 2023 is going to be devoted to the 25th anniversary of TriStar's Godzilla. And wait a minute. Yep. I hear footsteps leaving the podcast now. So
I can probably see a mob for me right now.
Yep. There I see it. So we're doing this because obviously 25th anniversaries are a big deal. And the 98 Godzilla film, regardless of what your opinions are of it, it's still a pretty big deal of a film that even if you are not a fan of it, this movie did a lot of positives. And anybody who has listened to this podcast long enough knows that I am a huge lover of this film. I am a huge supporter and defender. I'm not saying it's the perfect movie. I will say right out of the gate, though, and for the umpteenth time in the 11, 12 years we've been doing this podcast, that I do think fan reaction to this movie, even 2.5 decades later, is way out of proportion. Some saying it's the worst film, and it's like, if you're really being objective, like 2/3 of the Godzilla franchise at least is worse than what this movie is. But we'll get into some more of that details later. We're not here to start a flame war, but we're here to talk about the legacy and to also celebrate this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And so before we get into that, Jason, housekeeping.
Yeah, as usual, if you're watching us on YouTube, if you see a subscribe button down below, make sure to hit that subscribe button as well as smash the like button down there. And you can follow us, or you can find us everywhere, all in one place at our Linktree link that you see right on your screen there, /Daikaiju Network. And besides YouTube as one of the main video platforms that we're on, we're also on Twitch, Rumble, Facebook, and as well as Odyssey. And we have audio platforms that we're on, such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, as well as TuneIn. And we've got both video and audio versions of our episodes at our own website at daikaijunetwork.com.
All right, so there's so many different ways we could start off this particular episode with the topic of the 98 TriStar movie. And so I thought maybe one thing to do coming out of the gate is to just talk about the inception of this. And even this particular segment of the Godzilla 98 coverage or story could even have its own separate podcast, because there was a lot of drama surrounding the eventual making of this film.
Yeah, and the film itself, like, pretty much leading up to it, basically dates back into the early 90s, because there have been rummages
even
of...
late 80s, honestly.
Yeah, because there's been rummages and video footage, or I would say, not video footage, photos of the Stan Winston sculpture of his iteration of Godzilla from '94, which was supposed to be made probably around that time, but of course, a lot of development hell and all that stuff, and then just led up to the iteration that we know as the '98 Godzilla movie.
Yeah, I mean, so much. I mean, it originally started out, even going back to Yoshi Mitsubano, who directed Godzilla vs. Hedorah, wanted to get Americans involved to do sort of a 3D featurette involving Godzilla in the late 80s. And again, it just, for multitude of reasons, this whole project of trying to get Americans involved in the production of a Godzilla feature came and went multiple times. And then it seemed like around early mid-90s it seemed like maybe it finally got a hold. As Jason mentioned, there was a Stan Winston model of the Godzilla that they potentially were going to make for use in that particular iteration of the film. The film was supposed to be in San Francisco. It was also one story involved it fighting a monster called the Griffin. And then it was supposed to be directed by Jan de Bont, who did Speed and Twister and some other films over the years. And eventually, again, it just folded. And 1996, what?
You know, when you say that the film was supposed to take place in San Francisco and then Godzilla was supposed to face the Griffin, it's kind of a bit ironic that it seems like the 2014 Godzilla movie has taken some of the bits of those
Absolutely.
planned things from the previous story that they were going to originally do. You know, filmed in San Francisco, and then you have the Griffin, a weaned creature, and then you have the Mutos, where basically one of them was weaned in a way. So you can say it's a bit of a nod to that original story that was originally supposed to be made.
Oh, yeah, that was intentionally done. Yeah, of course. And I think anybody who thought, who has seen the treatment of the 94 film would at least appreciate the 2014 film a little bit more, because in many respects, yeah, it sort of is an homage to kind of that lost idea.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the screenplays written during that time was developed by the writers of Ted Elliott and Terry Rossio. Both of which, at least for me, I equate with the original Pirates of the Caribbean trilogy of films, and they've done numerous other things. And of course, they get involved. They're given story credit, at least partial screenplay credit, for this 98 film. And then, of course, 96 rolls around. Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin, buddies in filmmaking. They did Stargate. I don't remember if they did any other movies prior to Independence Day other than Stargate.
I'll have to take a look at that.
Comes out, massive hit, and then TriStar, is able to kind of, again, all the details. I mean, again, this almost deserves its own podcast. TriStar gets involved. They get the rights, and Japan is okay with Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin doing this. Emmerich and Devlin aren't necessarily fans of the original Godzilla series, which even to this day kind of peeves some fans, which I find to be ironic, because it's like, well, these guys are in the business of making movies. You don't necessarily have to be a fan of something in order to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So, but they weren't fans. They kind of turned it down a few times, and then eventually TriStar, through an awful lot of begging and then giving them a little bit more money in the budget and all that, Emmerich and Devlin gave in and decided they were going to do this. And so a lot of fans have this conspiracy that's been going around for 2.5 decades, saying that because they hated the original Godzilla, they intentionally went out of their way to bastardize this movie, which is one of the dumbest things I have ever heard, because they know their names are attached to this, even though they may not have been a fan of the original Toho franchise. That doesn't mean they're going to try to just crap everything with this project, because if they did that, they know their careers are done.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to do what they believe is in the best interest of their project. And so here we are. We get the 98 Godzilla movie, which, is, I mean, again, where to necessarily go from here? I think what we need to do is to talk about one of the greatest things that I think to have ever happened is the marketing blitz that led up to this film. It was back, I mean, I remember this.
I can remember like it was yesterday, yeah.
I mean, first and foremost, it was during a period of time in which you typically had one movie that was sort of christened to be the big summer blockbuster.
Mm-hmm.
And usually you had many different companies, cereal, other foodstuffs, toy company. I mean, you name it. Any company that made and sold anything, food and other products, usually wanted to get in on what they believed was going to be the hit summer film.
Yeah.
And that was before even today, where you could have multiple summer
like
blockbusters.
two, 3 of them.
Even more than that.
Yeah.
And So kind of like the year before, you had Batman and Robin, which was kind of christened to be the big summer blockbuster movie. That year, everything was Batman and Robin that summer and leading up to the release of that movie. And unfortunately, that movie was financially unsuccessful and critically panned and all that. And then Godzilla in '98 was supposed to be the film for that summer. And then the year after that, it was The Phantom Menace. So you have this marketing blitz, the likes of which, I mean, you and I, we had at that point been Godzilla fans for almost 6 years at that point. And, I was 12 at the time, I believe, that this movie was getting released.
No, you were 13 at the time, and I was getting close to turning 12. Yeah.
And Trendmasters a few years earlier had come out with their line of toys. You and I were flipping shit because we had, we became Godzilla fans on my birthday in '92. And all we had were those Imperial Godzilla toys, and we would take like a regular cheap gorilla toy you would find at a drugstore, and we would be like, okay, this is King Kong.
Yeah.
And like we would find other like animal or other weird creature toys. We're like, okay, this over here is Manda, this over here is Spiga, all that stuff. Like it was just an amalgamation of us finding something that closely resembled other kaiju.
Yeah.
And then finally Trendmasters comes out with their toy line in '94, and we're just mind blown.
Well, I think it was around late '93 or somewhere around that time period. And I can remember in Walmart during that period of time, and even Kmart too. And I remember we saw those. We were like, "Oh my god, we gotta get these!" And then I remember from time to time when we lived at a town where we weren't too terribly far from the Kmart. I mean, it was a walking distance to it, and I know we would go over to the toy aisle and everything. There'll be a section full of the Tripmaster, Godzilla, King of the Monsters, which was the first line, which you can see kind of back there with that giant Mecha Godzilla there, and then right next to it later on it transformed into Godzilla Wars. I think it was it 96 or something of the sort when they switched over to Godzilla?
It was at 95 because Mom and Dad were house hunting, and during one of their trips on house hunting, they stopped by not KB, but Toys R Us, and I got one of the Gigans, the Gigan that roared, and Gigan became a part of the Godzilla line when Godzilla Wars came out.
Yeah, and so I mean, with that, and then of course getting all the VHS tapes and everything from our vacations up to Twin Cities, and I know we've talked about some of that stuff a little bit ago in one of the episodes there, and but yeah, it was the New Year's Eve of '98 there when we
97.
Well, it was New Year's Eve '98, kind of transitioning from '97 to '98, and I remember that we thought it was the actual ball drop, and we were like, "Did it start already?" And then we heard like there was something going on and everything. All of a sudden, you see this tail hitting the ball drop, the crystal ball thing, and then smashing in, and then got that glow logo, kind of the one that Kent's wearing right now, the glowing board mark, and it said Godzilla. I can remember both of us turned our heads. We were like, "Holy shit!"
Yeah, we're like, Mom, Dad, there's a Godzilla movie coming out next year. And then
I can remember that we were
like,
I can remember we were so stoked once that happened, and then just the whole blitzkrieg of the marketing thing that Ken had mentioned, and then going up, uh, as I mentioned, the Twin Cities on our vacation where we got a couple of the '98 figurines and everything. I think it was after the movie came out, but
Trendmasters made those too.
yeah, I've. Sorry about that. my
He got so excited.
well, my damn chair always gets like the whole audio headphone set wire caught in this thing, but never mind. But I have like tons of things you can't even see off on the camera, but I've got quite a few things of the '98 Godzilla merchandise still in the box, except for one of them, which is right there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the marketing for this thing was incredible. And I know a lot of fans still remember how the design of Godzilla more or less was kind of kept secret.
Mm-hmm.
But the design eventually leaked out in a publication. I remember you and I, we were watching David Letterman one night, and I think he had Matthew Broderick on as his guest. And the little clip that they showed from the movie was the clip in which Godzilla emerges from underneath one of the New York streets in the film. And he comes face to face with Matthew Broderick in that scene before he heads over to the in front of the Flatiron building to chomp down the fish. And then we have our first sort of action sequence between the military and Godzilla within the film. And I was, and still am, I love this design, a more sleeker, dinosaurian type of design of Godzilla. And I love it. A lot of people hate the fact that it's based off a water dragon. So what? Like, artistic license. I mean, and again, a lot of people hate the design, and I keep having to remind the people, you do realize Toho signed off on this.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing could move forward within any part of the production of the film without Toho signing off on it. They signed off on this design. They signed off on how the story goes.
Yep.
and all that as well. Everything got Toho's approval, and I find it so funny because a few years later, starting with GMK, Toho started becoming incredibly immature by poking fun at this Godzilla, and they did it in that movie. They did it again in 2004's Final Wars. I'm like, you guys signed off on this.
Well,
why are you backing away from it?
Well, you had some of. I think nope, never mind. Well, you had some of the directors and everything, with Final Wars, kind of siding with the fans and everything, as far as the design.
Of course.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It was definitely pandering. But
the design.
I mean, the marketing for this thing was incredible. And then, of course, the reaction. The movie did bananas its very first week, made a lot of money. It's still, even though starting by the second week financially in the box office, it tanked, the movie cumulatively worldwide still did very well. And in fact, its box office numbers, if you adjust it for inflation, is on par, if not even actually a little bit better than what the 2014 movie did in 14. So the movie still financially made a profit, but because of the incredible backlash from fans, we never got the supposed trilogy that was going to come of this, and instead we ended up getting the animated series, which was a very good animated series.
All because people didn't really like the design of the Godzilla right there. I mean, come on, but at least a lot of the fans admittedly do like the animated series, which I mean,
and it mainly
and it's a bit interesting too that that they say they hate the movie, but then they go on to say that they like the anime version. So it's a little bit of hypocrisy in a way, but
two-faced.
Yeah, like what you said, a bit two-faced, but you know, with the continuing on with the story basing off of the first movie, and yeah, it's overall it was really good for what it did and for as long as it premiered on TV.
Yeah, I mean the cartoon, as far as ratings goes, did very well. But a lot of the fans, the reason why they liked it, outside the fact that there usually was a monster of the week on there, a lot of fans were saying they liked it because Godzilla shot fire, and I'm saying he did in the 98 film, because when you see him blast his atomic breath the first time, when you look at it around his tongue, you're seeing the flames come out and around, which
Mhm.
signifies he had it. He just didn't use it a whole lot in the film.
Mhm.
And I don't want to be um, spending a ton of time on like fan reaction and the hypocrisy, but I do think that is one of the legacies of this film is, not just how well it did in the box office, and also how it was received in the opinions of critics and fans. But I think, too, the fact that even to this very day, there's still a large pocket of the fan base that really is very hypocritical, and I think very unfair in their criticisms of the film, because a lot of the fans hate the film for really one of two, if not both, reasons. Usually because they don't like the design, and or because this Godzilla was a mutated water dragon.
Mhm.
And it's it's so funny because the Japanese Godzilla stood upright, and at the time of the original Gojira, paleontologists thought that, yeah, your theropod dinosaurs stood more upright like a person and dragged their tails. Obviously, decades later, they realized anatomically that just was not possible for them to do that. And so you have a more dinosaurian version. And a lot of people say that this is nothing more than, a Jurassic Park ripoff. Well, considering the science of the time and the fact that this was a movie that was, in production going all the way back to the 80s, I don't understand the thinking people have. Well, it's just cashing off of Jurassic Park. They were trying to make this damn thing for years, if not like a
Before
decade and a
Jurassic
half.
Park.
They finally, right, and I don't understand the thinking, and a lot of it goes back to just how a lot of fandoms are anymore, where there's usually something within a given fandom that unites a lot of hatred within that fandom of something involving that. Like, for example, within the He-Man universe, New Adventures of He-Man, that TV series, late 80s, early 90s, tends to be, kind of one of those sticking points within the He-Man fandom. With Star Wars, it's the prequels, if not the new trilogy of films that just recently came out. It's always something, and G98 is sort of that version for the Godzilla fandom, in which there's so many conspiracy theories and so much of it is untrue that it's just so mind-boggling the logic people will ensue. And it got to a point where so many people also would say that this movie is closer to a remake of Beast of 20,000 Fathoms than it is Godzilla. And so I kept testing people. I would be online, and I even did it recently here 3 weeks ago, where a person said the same thing. It's like a remake of Beast of 20,000 Fathoms rather than Godzilla. And I keep asking people, why do you think that? Because nothing about this movie, other than the fact that it's a giant reptile attacking New York, nothing about this movie is anywhere near like the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. And I say, point to me multiple connections. And even this person, who I even have their posts, their response up here right in front of me, saying that, yeah, New York, the way the creature rampages through the city on first appearance is done to a similar way to G98's first rampage, with the exception of eating the policeman. I'm like, no, it's not. And then outside of that, they're saying nothing else.
Mhm.
And there's no connections. And a lot of people have to remember, too, you do realize the original Godzilla was partially inspired by Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. King Kong was the initial response because that thing did bonkers in Japan. And then earlier in 54, Beast from 20,000 Fathoms was also released in Japan. Did incredibly well there, too. And Tomoyuki Tanaka was that pushed him even more to want to do his own project. So the mental logic and acrobats, so many fans for 25 years have been trying to pull on this film. It makes no sense. And I'm just like, just come out and admit it. You hate the design. Okay. And even then it's like, okay, that doesn't constitute an immense hatred for a film. And then they'll try to say, well, the character's this, character's that. And I go, well, take a look at this Godzilla movie. Look at a movie like All Monsters Attack. Take a look at a movie like Godzilla vs. Hedorah or Godzilla vs. Megalon. And I name off so many other Godzilla movies. And I'm like, look at the character development and lack thereof here. No one has any legitimate people will refuse to admit that, yeah, a lot of the Japanese films are either on par, if not even inferior, to how the production of this one went. And I found it even immensely, not just frustrating, but funny. Back in 2016, when Shin Godzilla was released here in the States, depending upon where you lived, it played either for a day, if not a week. And the funny thing is that for so many fans, the reasons that they stated that they loved that movie were the same reasons they hated this. And to this day, that still is a bug in my craw because, again, the hypocrisy. And again, I don't want to. A lot of people are probably rolling their eyes and they're saying you're shitting on the fan base. Here's the thing. I think the fan base does need to be shat on when necessary. And it's not just because I'm a huge fan of this film. It is because of the hypocrisy that we've already discussed. And I found a couple of YouTube videos, and I think if you search, if you type in the keyword, it's either is G98 really that bad or is Godzilla 98 really that bad? You get a couple of really good videos from a number of impartial people. And they sit down, and one of them has a guy where he has a live feed for about 35 minutes, and he's kind of having a conversation with people who are on his live feed discussing this movie. And he's basically saying, kind of like I've been saying, look, it isn't the greatest movie ever made. But really, what's the problem that so many people have here? And even he goes through and tells people, no, that's bunk because it happens in this movie. Like, how can you say you hate it here when in this other movie or so, the same thing happens, if not worse? And so he basically says the standing that fans have on this movie really is, by and large, unfounded. Even if you hate the design, truly, if you objectively hate the design of this Godzilla, it still doesn't necessarily pan out to be this ultimate hatred of the film overall. And so I didn't want to really do this because I know it's such a hot button issue, but again, it's because I do care about this fandom, and that's why I bring it up. I need the fandom to be consistent, is what I'm saying, is that, okay, I'm okay if you don't like the movie, but give me legitimate reasons. And then when I start having a dialogue with some of these folks, I go, okay, but in this other Godzilla movie or two, this happened. Well, there is this bias for whatever reason. And I'm even seeing a little bit of that with the MonsterVerse movies, how there's kind of this pocket of the fandom that hates the MonsterVerse movies. And I'm going, wait a minute. You guys finally were given everything you complained that did not happen with this film. And now you're hating on that. Look, I have been very upfront on the podcast in recent years, as these MonsterVerse films have come out, where I've said there are aspects of even the MonsterVerse films I don't like, but by and large, I think the MonsterVerse as a whole
Yeah,
is
and
pretty. You and I even covered the MonsterVerse as a whole in our, what was it, summer of 21 podcasts that year.
I think so. And I know that when we reviewed Godzilla King of the Monsters, when that movie came out, and I know both of us have said that one of the biggest gripes that we kind of had with that movie was sort of really pandering and leaving some of those member berries from the past films for the fans and everything. Otherwise, it's still a really good movie in the MonsterVerse, but of course, that was sort of our biggest gripe was kind of the whole pandering for the fans. Just try to, try to leave the member berries, but it should at least be its own sort of movie trying to tell its own story, but still kind of at least have a little bit of callback, but not too much like the King of the Monsters movie did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I just like, and it's sort of as frustrating because other kaiju podcasts rarely, if at all, will confront its own fan base. And I think you have to periodically when you think a fan base is being unreasonable. And I've always believed the fan base was very unreasonable with this film. And I've noticed over the years a lot more people have gotten to a point where the argument is it's a really good monster movie, but not a good Godzilla movie, or it's not a Godzilla movie. There's still folks out there that are saying not a Godzilla movie, but a fun monster movie. They're playing these mental gymnastics. I don't even try to. I just kind of am like, okay, sure, whatever. If that's what you need to do to watch it, okay, then go ahead
and I would at least want to point out that if this movie wasn't made, because originally when Godzilla ended in '95 there with Godzilla vs. Australia, that Toho was originally gonna put the whole franchise to rest. I think maybe completely or something. I can't quite remember
completely.
But if it wasn't for this movie, there wouldn't have been, sort of a restoration or a revival of the franchise itself. And then if it wasn't for that movie, we wouldn't have gotten the whole Millennium series of Godzilla films from Japan.
Or MonsterVerse.
Or any of the animes or con or whichever. I mean, of today, we probably wouldn't have gotten any of these newer additions to the Godzilla franchise if it wasn't for the '98 version.
Yeah, and you're talking something that I also want to discuss. So let's kind of make that transition here. And again, like I said, I don't want to spend a bunch of time. I don't want to make this a crap fest on the fans, because I've made it known, and I think my piece has been already said well enough
for the umpteenth time.
Well, yeah, I mean, like I said, I am a supporter and defender of this movie, and I've even come out. This isn't the greatest movie of all time. There are issues. If you want me to criticize this movie, I'll give you a couple criticisms here right now. One criticism is at near the beginning of the movie, after the Japanese fishing vessel was attacked and the surviving cook is taken to a hospital, and we start seeing Jean Reno and his crew come in for the very first time in the movie. And so they're alone in that hospital room with him. They have the Geiger counter, and the Geiger counter is going off the chart. Where's the radioactive gear that Jean Reno and his crew should be wearing? Whoopsies. Like there's a big whoopsie-doo there, And I will even admit some of the animation of Godzilla in a few sequences isn't necessarily all that smooth. It's a little jilted in some scenes too. So again, I have no problems criticizing the movie where I think there's legitimate criticisms, but I just think again, for kind of the final time, the just the enormous venom spewed at this movie, I find to be unfounded and very much fabricated for whatever ridiculous reason. I have yet to really see and hear any legitimate criticisms from people. I can understand some people just saying, it just didn't hit my sensibilities of what a Godzilla movie is. That to me comes closer to what someone maybe I would find to be a legitimate criticism. But the hatred, the it's not so much that people not liking it bothers me, it's the hatred, the absolute hatred. It would be like me looking at you, Jason, and being like, God damn it, I hate you, you stupid son of and it's like, well, what? And it's just like, because of your face, something stupid like that. It's like, well, what about my face? It's just your face. Okay, I can't really do anything about that. But I mean, you see where I'm saying here. There's nothing real legitimate about it. It's like, okay, you dislike it, that's fine. But to hate something so passionately, that's what gets me. But yeah,
let's move on.
Let's talk about really what good came out of this. And I want to start off by having us talk about our dad for a moment here. Our dad always thought that the Japanese Godzilla movies were very silly. He would watch them with us a lot of the times, leading up to the year 98. And a lot of times he thought they were pretty silly. And he went and saw this movie with us back in 98. And he, a couple times, came out and said, "This is the best Godzilla movie I have seen." What's the point I'm trying to make is that for those folks who really didn't care for the Japanese Godzilla film,
or wasn't well versed,
they liked this movie. And on top of that, not just for people who had been around and seen some of the older films and didn't care for them, there were people who were born around 97, give or take a handful of years around that period, who saw this movie. If it wasn't their first Godzilla movie, it was one of their first. It created a whole new generation of fans. Okay. Yes, some of them have gone on to say, yeah, the movie isn't all that good or whatever. So be it. It still created Godzilla fans. Not only that, it introduced a larger segment of the United States to Godzilla, the likes of which had never been done before. The closest it ever came was when John Belushi did this parody of Godzilla for when Godzilla vs. Megalon was cut down to an hour for, what was it, a Sunday evening movie back in the late 70s, like 78 or something like that. And it was nothing more than John Belushi making fun of Godzilla. And that premiering of Godzilla vs. Megalon to the United States ended up harming Godzilla more than anything else, because John Belushi and the network were out to just make fun of Godzilla in that movie to no end. It was a joke to them. And as a result, a lot of boomers and Gen Xers, and maybe even those from the Greatest Generation, looked at Godzilla and kind of were like, yeah, cheap ass Godzilla. They don't know what they're doing. It's all kid stuff. It's funny. You don't, you're not meant to take it seriously, when there was a whole slew of other Godzilla films before that with serious messaging and all that stuff. And this lack of understanding of not just how Toho went about making the Godzilla movies, but also Japanese cinema and what the Japanese movie industry itself was going through in the mid-70s on into kind of the early part of the 80s. The 98 film sort of brought more eyeballs to it, even for a lot of general audience members who may not have been Godzilla fans. Yeah, a lot of them walked away not caring about this movie, but they didn't necessarily make fun of it because it wasn't a movie that was about poking fun at the character or anything like that, the way John Belushi had done 2 decades earlier. And so it brought in, we already talked about the enormous merchandise. We finally, for the first time in the United States history, got official releases of films like Destroy All Monsters on home video here in the States. The movie had played a handful of times in the past, but we never got an official home video release of it until this movie was released.
And even considering the rest of the Heisei series after Godzilla vs. Bylane, where of course we've gotten obviously the King Ghidorah, Mechagodzilla 2, Space Godzilla Destroya, like all those came out roughly around the same year, or maybe a year later. But yeah, due to this movie, we wouldn't know how long those movies would have came out.
Yeah, they may not have come out. I still think they would have, but it probably would have taken a lot longer for those to have been released. And again, as that guy said in that teaser, that New Year's Eve teaser, 1998, the year of Godzilla. 1998 was the year of Godzilla. You couldn't get away from Godzilla basically throughout the entire year. It wasn't anything related to this one. You had Japanese versions of it out there.
And with that whole media market blitz that they had during that year, constantly putting the name Godzilla out there for the whole masses of the United States. I mean, it should have been a dream come true for the Godzilla fan base there, because then it's like, oh, now we're going to be sort of in the mainstream and everything now. But then, of course, not going to deal with what we talked about earlier. But I mean, it's like, well, you had a good opportunity with it, but then just sort of,
yeah. I mean, outside of kind of hitting the reset button, so to speak, on reintroducing the character to the West, the enormous merchandising, and then creating a whole new generation of fans, regardless of whether or not they, as they got older, still liked the movie or not. The introduction of films that got official home video releases for the first time ever,
or reintroduction of past films.
The name Godzilla, even years after, between this movie and the 14 film, and I'm skipping the Millennium because I am thinking from the vantage point of the non-fan. The non-fans probably had no clue that Toho ended up doing a Millennium series for a handful of years after this. The fact, though, that this movie still, because of its marketing and everything that happened, anybody who was cognizant during the year 1998 still had Godzilla in the back of the mind. As Bob Eggleton likes to say, with anything Godzilla that comes out, it's all good, because what it does is it throws the name out there and it gets people to think about it. And as a result, I think if you did not have the 98 film, the 2014 film, I don't know if it ever would have happened. But at the same time, I don't think the 2014 film would have necessarily gotten some of the eyeballs it ended up getting, along with some of the continuing MonsterVerse films, although a lot of that was the result of kind of what happened with some of those initial films in the MonsterVerse. But it really helped to put Godzilla back on the map to the masses, especially to people who are not fans.
And even it's sort of like some of those that were making fun of Godzilla, as you mentioned earlier with the John Belushi thing. With this movie, I would think that it would kind of make them rethink of how Godzilla can be, or originally was, instead of just being this cheap, campy kids thing, that it can also have this serious adult themed tone to it.
Yeah, because there are Japanese films that tackle that. And that's something I want to tackle in just a moment here, because there's something I want to bring up involving this particular movie that I think a lot of people don't realize you can view it as. But it really, I mean, take a look at it. It's something I realized that I keep forgetting is going on. It's going on right now, even as we speak, in that Godzilla is everywhere. He may not be like everywhere, but I guarantee you, I'm not kidding. I can go down to my Target about 3 miles away and I can find Godzilla figures there.
Even at the local Walmart here in a small town of Iowa. It's like
I can find Godzilla figures.
They still even have some of those was it the Mego Ultra 7s here.
And I once in a while at that same Target can find like these lapel pins. I forget who makes them and what they're called, but they've done them in Disney characters and stuff too.
Yeah, I know. I've seen them.
Big.
I know. I've seen them. Seen some of those at the Target where I used to live up in the Twin Cities. There.
Yeah, and I can head to the Walmart half a block away from that Target. I can find that one Godzilla board game. I can find Godzilla Funkos. You know, we were talking earlier how when we first became fans, all we had were those Imperial Godzillas. And then Trendmasters came along a year and a half, 2 years later. And you and I then, when Trendmasters started that whole deal, we were in heaven.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something a lot of us keep forgetting and really take for granted, is that Godzilla is now more mainstream than he ever has been in the United States. And it started here. It started with this film. Even if you hate this movie with every fiber of your being, that helped to usher in a new era of Godzilla recognition here in the West. And it's, as they say, the rest is history.
And you can say it can be like a revival, like in a revival period, or you could even say a golden age sort of thing. Because like I said earlier, if it wasn't for the '98 Godzilla movie, Toho probably wouldn't have made the Millennium series. They probably would still have the franchise put the rest there. We wouldn't have gotten the couple of the anime shows or the anime movie on Netflix. There would have especially gotten the MonsterVerse movie there. But I don't know if Toho would have actually kept the promise of keeping the franchise quote unquote dead after the Godzilla after the Godzilla versus Destroyer movie. We wouldn't have known how many years it would have taken between Godzilla versus Destroyer and then now, of when they would have thought to make, whenever they would have gotten back to the franchise then. But since the Godzilla '98 movie came out, then a year later they came out with Godzilla 2000 right then and there, and then rest is history.
Yeah, and I want to transition to kind of, and this is something I talked to you about a while ago, and like I've said, I wanted to write an article about this, and I still might do it. I've been wanting to do it on our website. And then, unless there's some other things you want to talk about too involving this movie, I want to potentially end this show talking about the movie itself. You and I, like, when we watch the movie, what do we think of it? What do we like about it, etc. So, um, one of the things that we sort of kind of hinted upon, if not lightly touched upon at this point in the show already, is that the general mass is kind of, I've always tended to look at Godzilla movies by and large as just being giant monster fare, that there's nothing really to them. And those of us who have been fans long enough know otherwise, that a vast majority of these movies tend to have some theme or message to them. And 98 is no different. And I have heard a number of criticisms over the years from a number of people who don't like the movie, saying this isn't Godzilla, that, the original Gojira was about being anti-nuclear and all that. This movie doesn't do that. I even heard it in an article from the head of G-Fan magazine and the former head of the G-Fest itself. That simply is totally untrue. And I will start by saying that I don't know if Emmerich and Devlin intended for the theme to be this, but it is a theme that I have noticed more and more every time I watch this movie. And it's a theme that I think begs to be really studied and to really be focused on by human beings. And I'll get to why in just a second. So, obviously, like I just said, the original Gojira, anti-nuclear, we're entering a nuclear age. Nuclear weapons could be the downfall of mankind, etc. Raids, again, slightly kind of plays with that too, but it's more of a general monster fare film. You have King Kong versus Godzilla. You're talking about a comedy that kind of touches upon branding and commercialism. Mothra versus Godzilla takes a slightly more serious viewpoint of what takes place in King Kong versus Godzilla and kind of looks at it as more of an evil aspect of commercialism. And so you have other Godzilla films down the line that play with themes and stuff like that. As you and I have even kind of poked a little bit with this resurgence some people have had in recent years with Godzilla's Revenge, where a lot of fans are looking at it as how key latch kids kind of from that era were abandoned, and as a result, a lot of them were an only child and needed to have some type of hero to look up to, and they went to their imaginations a lot of the times, and how it's sort of a depressing tale of latchkey kids during that period. So I'm going to do something like that with this film. The theme that I get out of the 98 Godzilla film is that mankind is terribly destructive of what it doesn't understand. And mankind is very destructive even when individuals like a Nick Tatopoulos, who is a scientist, and you have some other scientists in this film as well, that their whole idea is to study and to learn about things. And usually they're against killing certain things. And I know some people will say, well, when you have something attacking the city that's the size of Godzilla, well, yeah, you would want to kill it. But the human characters like Nick Tatopoulos and others are very on board very quickly in the movie to kill Godzilla. That mankind created this creature out of nuclear testing and hubris and Cold War reasons and all that stuff too, from French Polynesian atomic testing. As a result, the rooster comes back to the nest in that it's starting to bite them in the ass when it attacks fishing trolleys and then starts to settle in New York.
Mm-hmm.
Godzilla goes to New York with the intention of nesting. And it's not going out of its way to be destructive. It just has to be, because that's what's there. It's big, it's going to run into things, etc. When provoked, that's when the creature gets aggressive. And some will say, well, no, it runs away. I will just come out and say that in some respects, it runs away to set up traps for people.
I mean, you've seen it. You've seen it in plain sight, for example, in a few instances within the movie itself.
Yeah, and I'll get to that more in a second when we talk about the movie proper. And so, to kind of put this in a nutshell, the 98 Godzilla movie, I don't think touches upon this sort of theme. Excuse me, it touches upon a theme that I don't think any of the Japanese movies have ever touched upon before.
Kit just dropped off here. Let me see here for a moment. Hold on 1 minute here, folks. I'm gonna be messaging him here. Your video feed dropped. So, I'm probably. Let's see, maybe. Get off. And I'll send you a new link. Not sure what the heck happened here. Okay, so... Oh, there he is.
Yeah.
Okay, there you are.
I've been in the room the whole time.
Oh, well, for some...
And all that.
Oh, well, for some reason, your video feed on the main... thing here just suddenly dropped off.
Yeah, I don't know why.
Yes, I'm not sure why either, but apparently when I went into the thing here, you were still in there and just connect you onto the stream. So now we're good.
Because I was about to drop knowledge, and I think someone wanted to cut me off.
Yeah, someone dropped in like little gremlins or something. That didn't like the movie still to this day, 25 years later.
Yeah. Well, anyways, what I was about to say was that this movie touches upon a theme that I don't believe any of the Toho films have ever touched upon before, and that is man being this destructive creature. That this movie is incredibly depressing in my view because I am a huge nature freak. Yes, I'm a tree hugger, and I embrace that with every fiber of my being. I am a fucking tree hugger, and I'm proud of it. And I love animals. If you hate animals, fuck you. But I look at this as being very depressing because you have this creature that just... through no fault of its own, is mutated, grows large, and ends up, as a result, causing damage, and it does it out of necessity to live. It's not like the Japanese Godzilla is, through some of the movies periodically, going out of its way to be destructive for the sake of being destructive. This is just trying to live. As Nick Totopoulos tells Colonel Hicks at one point when they're in the subway gap where it had crawled through earlier, he's saying he's not purposely trying to evade you. He's just an animal. And so that's what this Godzilla is. It is a Godzilla with a personality. It is a personality for survival. And man is out to completely destroy it. And one of the things that it gets me every time, along with the ending to Godzilla vs. Destroya, is that it's the ending. When this Godzilla gets caught in the suspension cables, shot down, and you have David Arnold's score, swelling and creating a very melodic, depressing type of tune, and then he crashes down, and then he kind of gives this little groan. And then Nick kind of walks a little bit closer to it, and you hear the heartbeat, and then you see the eye eventually close, signifying obviously that it has finally died. It is very depressing, and in the background, you have people celebrating, and then of course it's this very brief sequence of other people, other characters in the film celebrating the death of Godzilla. And even though I think we're supposed to be cheering the demise of Godzilla, I look at it as very depressing, because here you have this creature, again, through no fault of its own, just having gotten in the way or being involved through nuclear testing in the French Polynesian Islands decades earlier, and it mutates. And it's just trying to survive. And it's killed because people are assholes. I mean, I'm just going to come out and say, and to try to just be as blunt as I can about it, people are assholes. I mean, we are a very destructive species. It has been proven, for example, that we are the reason that a number of mammals from the Pleistocene period did go extinct, because we overhunted them. We went out of our way to kill some of these species of mammals. Because we are just a destructive species. And you're seeing something like that play out here with the 98 film. That even though you have scientists on board whose whole sort of teaching and philosophy should be to study, not destroy, I understand, again, the creature the size of Godzilla in a metropolitan area, you can say you make exceptions for it, but they get on board very quickly with wanting to destroy this animal as well. That mankind at its core, regardless of whether they are military personnel who are trained to kill or scientists who are trained to study and want organisms kept alive at least for a while to understand them, that man at its core is a very destructive species. That they may understand a little bit of what they're going up against, but ultimately don't care, because if something gets in their way, they want to kill it. Godzilla happened to get in their way of the largest metropolitan area in the United States. As a result, they're like, yeah, let's just kill it. Let's not learn too much about this thing and why it is what it is. And so that's, in a nutshell, how I have viewed this movie, that the theme is man is destructive, of what it doesn't understand. And even though man is responsible for this creation, it still will go out of its way to kill something that it doesn't understand. That mankind by nature isn't as inquisitive as it likes to think. I don't know. Do you have any response to that or ideas as far as to that particular theory of how to view this film?
Well, I know with the movie, while I did recently just watch it here, that I mean, you do get the nuclear parts in it, because I mean, it's apparent into the story, and it's part of how Godzilla is obviously made, and then they obviously have it, when Matthew Broderick's character Nick Totopoulos, they're studying the worm, like these earthworms earlier in the movie there, nearby Chernobyl, and then of course, I mean, it's still part of the DNA of the movie itself, but then also sort of kind of deep diving more into sort of studying the creature Godzilla in a way, whereas a lot of the Godzilla movies previously leading up to this one really haven't done that a whole lot. I mean, they do get a little bit into studying Godzilla in a way, but
I think it's the closest they come to with Yamane.
Yeah, but with this one, I think that they dive a bit more into Godzilla itself, and as well as more of its behavior in a way, in its nature, that sort of thing, to me, in a way. And obviously, kind of, man testing things and everything. That's also kind of part of the franchise DNA in a way, because I mean, it's sort of part of the whole lore from the very get go. There, so I mean, for me, I think it takes at least a few things to kind of meld together in a way, instead of just one main thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of times people, including those who create art, whether it's a painting, piece of music, whatever, they usually say, well, if that's what you get out of it, then that's what you get out of it. And that's what I've gotten out of this 98 film is that, one of the things that Godzilla fans long enough have always said, there tends to be themes in a vast majority of these films. And I do think that there is a theme here with the 98 film, and that a lot of people, just because of, just intense, unfounded rage, or just, I don't know, for whatever reason, have just sort of refused to see it. And I think that is how I have viewed it. Anyways, that's a message that runs through the course of this film. But unless there's something else you want to discuss, I thought we could discuss the movie itself, things we like and things we want to touch upon and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I can't think of anything else.
Yeah. One of the things I want to discuss is Godzilla himself, not just his look per se, but his personality. One of the things that I love about this Godzilla and why I like this particular change in Godzilla is that I like his speed. I like the fact that this is a fast Godzilla, that this is a Godzilla that, unlike the Japanese one that is more or less an indestructible juggernaut, which does, I have to admit, especially as I've gotten older, does get old pretty quick. The fact that this Godzilla, even though he can take a punch, it is proven throughout the course of this film, he can take on some military shots. This Godzilla isn't Superman. This Godzilla is not totally indestructible. And that this Godzilla, instead of continuing to walk into, the path of fire like the Japanese one is known to do, he's fast. He evades. He sets up traps.
He's just more agile in the way, and he uses that mainly to his advantage.
This is a Godzilla where it's about, it's also about using intelligence too, because again, the Japanese one has always been about, I will walk into this and I will take it and I will be fine. The only time in which he may not be fine is when he's fighting other kaiju. That's about the only exception. But the Japanese military, we all know how it's going to happen. Here, the military does end up killing it. And that's another thing that a lot of fans hate about it. But I'm going, but that's, you miss the whole aspect that this Godzilla, there's more of a stake. If you are a fan of Godzilla, which all of us are, and you're rooting for Godzilla a lot of the times, which I was and still do when I watch this movie, it makes his defeat that more heartbreaking. Because you do realize, you worry about this Godzilla more, because you do realize, yeah, with enough firepower, he can be killed. And he proves throughout the course of this movie, he even proves it again later in the animated show, that through speed, agility, intelligence, that he'll run away, set up traps, evade you. And that's something that I really think is a good difference with this film. When I sit there anymore and watch a lot of the Japanese Godzilla movies and I see the military come and attack him, it's like, this isn't as entertaining as it was when I was a kid. Because when you're a kid, you don't understand plot as well and nuance and all that. You're there for the fireworks. And yeah, anytime and even as a kid, I knew the military wasn't going to succeed, but you got an entertainment value out of it.
Yeah, and the one thing I would want to point out too is that if Godzilla did exist in a way, I would say that this iteration of Godzilla would probably be more of a realistic approach of how Godzilla probably would have looked like after all the tests and everything if he did indeed exist in a way due to all the atomic and nuclear testing of decades prior compared to kind of the dinosaur looking version of the Japanese Godzilla iteration, where just kind of standing up straight like any ordinary human out there, and then with this, and then having it be more dinosaur-like with the Japanese version, whereas this one you're taking more of a kind of pre-existing modern reptile that lives today, like an iguana or a crocodile, whichever. And if they went through all the nuclear testings throughout the years, decades prior, and then mutate into what could have been a more realistic Godzilla.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, and it makes sense. And just I've heard some people say, "Well, this is not what it would look like." Well, maybe not exactly, but they say, "Well, its head is too big." Well, you do realize that T-Rex's head technically is too big for its body, but a lot of these super predators had powerful yet lightweight skulls and long tails to help counterbalance, so that they wouldn't go on their face. This Godzilla is the same thing. So yeah. One of the things too I want to touch upon, and this is something that I think even haters of the movie can get on board with. And interestingly enough, I find it strange that it's never really discussed much, if at all, even with us on this podcast. And that is the score. David Arnold's score. I have to say, and it's not because I am a super fan of this film, objectively speaking, I think this is an incredible Godzilla score. This is, in my opinion, not only one of the best, it's one of my favorites as well. The themes he has for Godzilla, the ominous tones, the very sad and crap, I just forgot the word. The really sad music as he's getting shot down by those F-18s at the end. It really adds to his demise there at the end. It's similar to the way Ifukube's score aided in Godzilla's death at the end of Destroya as well. That seeing Godzilla die was one thing, but as we've always said here on this podcast, music does matter. That music kind of adds that extra emotional oomph to certain scenes. It either adds the sadness, it either adds excitement, anger, you name it.
And with this kind of music, I mean, if you can compare it with any of the other Godzilla music, past and today, too, you can say it sort of blends into the whole kind of music that has been composed for the other Godzilla movies. It sort of blends, or you can say it's sort of similar in a way.
I think if you did a blind listening test, if you took people who just are not fans, and you just play and you put them in a room and you ask and you play different clips of music, some from Godzilla films, others from other films that are not Godzilla films, and you play a snippet of it and you ask them afterwards, was this from a Godzilla movie or a different movie? And I think if you played some of the music from this film and you asked someone, did this come from a Godzilla movie? I think you would get a majority of people that would say, yeah, that it is music that is very much befitting of the character. It demonstrates size with some of the music that is being played at various points. There's even some lighthearted music. I think of some of the military tunes that play in this movie, where you have more of a type of melody. It's more happy, I guess, for lack of a better term. I think David Arnold deserves more credit here. I think even with haters, there are a lot of people out there that admire the scores of these films. And I would think that even if you don't like this film, you would get on board with saying, yeah, I mean, the music is very good. It's very listenable. It is, like I said, in my opinion, it's one of my favorites. And I truly, objectively do think it is one of the better scores within the Godzilla franchise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and don't bother with Godzilla the album. That just has various artist ones.
I still like to listen to that though. I like a lot of the music there.
For me, I just want to go for the score, not just the ones of the various artists. Because when I bought that, I was like, this is not what I was looking for.
It's got a couple of David Arnold tracks. It's like towards the end, but
that's that's the one that I was really looking for. But I was like, is there any more?
Yeah,
any more of the score
like
to it? But then it's like, yeah, then there's the whole score with all of his tracks.
Wallflowers, Green Day,
Yeah.
Diddy or Daddy or whatever he's calling himself now.
P Diddy.
PP. I mean, I don't know. But I still think the music's good. But
what do you think of the visual effects to the movie? Do they still hold up 25 years later?
Quite a few do. Some of them, though, do show their age. I will say this to people, though. This movie has been sort of enhanced since the first Blu-ray of this film was released, because I noticed it. How long ago was it now? I noticed it 8 years ago when I bought my first Blu-ray version of this film. You could tell that Sony went back. They not only cleaned up the entire film, but they enhanced the effects too, and it's gorgeous.
One of these times, I need to get me the 4K Ultra HD version of the movie.
I do have that one, even though I don't own a 4K TV.
But yeah. I need to get that one of these times, because I still have that the Blu-ray one that you're mentioning of. But yeah, I want to kind of see if there's any differences in between them.
Yeah, but even if you say watch the VHS or DVD versions of this film, the effects are, what I would say, are still decent. There are some scenes where there are computer effects that you don't realize are computer effects, unless you do behind the scenes or you pay really close attention. In a way, obviously, those effects are spectacular. When you're talking about like Godzilla and the baby Godzillas, it gets to a point now where it's hit and miss.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said earlier, some of the visual effects work, even in the enhanced Blu-ray version, it's not there.
And
it just isn't.
And also some of the practical effects, particularly the baby Godzillas there, you can definitely tell, with the animatronic, kind of the whole robotic movement there, where some of them kind of did act out more robotic-ish in a way. Instead, kind of the whole smooth movement in between, which they could have done a little bit better there. The visuals, in my point, I think quite a few of it's, I would say, still hold up to it. But yeah, some of them have shown their age in a ways. But yeah.
it's still better than a lot of other films. I mean, a lot of people always compare it to Jurassic Park, and I go, well, you have to understand that Universal is a significantly bigger studio than Sony TriStar. Not only that, they had Spielberg with them, who made sure, and Spielberg himself even threw some of his own money at it. He
Mhm.
made sure that they invested in this new technology, and other studios in general were playing catch up. And Columbia TriStar just didn't quite have the investment in infrastructure at this point in time. For what they did have, it worked. I still look at this movie and I go, yeah, not every effect sequence is spectacular, but so what? I mean, it still looks better than sci-fi movies at the time. It still looked better than sci-fi movies that were made 10 years after. Um, it's it does the job. And I
Mhm.
think a lot of people, again, that become effects snobs, um, are just people I don't even want to talk to, because it's like, so what? Like, even when it was a guy in a suit, you knew it was a guy in a suit on a set of miniatures. That doesn't deter you from watching, the Showa era films or the Heisei era films. It,
Right.
so what? And I just kind of shrug my shoulders and I'm like, okay, like, it's hit and miss. That happens with time because we're seeing other films now where that stuff continues to improve year after year. And this is a
Mhm.
25-year-old movie. What do you think of the cast?
Uh, as far as the cast goes, I think it's pretty decent in a way. Um, for me, I probably wouldn't have picked Matthew Broderick in a way. I don't know if he would, because I don't know if he was like kind of the whole A-lister during that time in the later '90s and all that. I know he was in Ferris Bueller and some of those other
Bueller.
movies in the '80s and stuff. I'm not, because I mean you had quite a few of other A-listers in the day. You know, George Clooney kind of up and coming. You know, with the whole Batman and Robin sort of thing. You also had Val Kilmer. Those sort of things. Even Tom Cruise. But I mean, for what the story was telling and everything, I think the cast overall was pretty decent. I do like the French guy, by the way. I think he was,
Jean Reno.
yeah, I think he was, for me, I think he was the highlight of the movie in a way. I do like his character in a way, but yeah, overall, it's a pretty decent cast for what the movie was going with and for
Yeah.
what the story was trying to tell.
Yeah. For me personally, I would say maybe with the exception of like Monster Zero, this is maybe my favorite cast. I really do. When I do think of just Godzilla casts in general, this is usually one of the first groups of cast members that I think of. I do like them. Are they the greatest actors in this movie? No. But I think they're fun. I do think they're a lot of fun. They deliver comedy where appropriate. I think they do their jobs very well. I think Kevin Dunn is spectacular. Hank Azaria is, to me, the highlight from a cast member standpoint. Jean Reno is great. Mary Patillo is a pretty decent love interest. Matthew Broderick is okay, but I still like him in this film. Um, Michael Lerner as Mayor Ebert, I think is great. By the way, rest in peace. He died here a handful of weeks ago. And then you have the other guy playing his assistant Gene. Of course, it's a riff off of Siskel and Ebert, and I know people are like, "Oh my gosh," because they gave a thumbs down. Emmerich's being petty. It's like, no, he's having fun here. Like,
Mhm.
other filmmakers have done the same thing. Um, I forget the actor's name, but he plays um, O'Neill, Major O'Neill.
Oh yeah.
I think he's pretty good and fun. I think Jean Reno's cast of French Secret Service agents are pretty fun too. There's some funny dialogue periodically where, oh, you call this coffee? I call this America. And then later, you told me this was French roast, and he hands up, I mean French roast. And then he's looking at the pastries and kind of like no croissant,
and then
monsieur.
and then handing out chewing gum and stuff. It's like, oh, it's supposed to make us more American.
And then he does an Elvis impersonation at the checkpoint.
Yeah.
Elvis Presley movies. He was the king. I do like it. I mean, this is, I think, a fun cast, fun characters. In my opinion, out of all the Emmerich movies I've seen quite a few of them. This, I think, is not only his best, but it's my favorite. I mean, it is a very memorable cast, and I think it's great.
Yeah. So, do you have it?
Want to close out with like final thoughts on the film and then kind of its legacy?
Yeah. Well, before we do that, we didn't really touch upon as far as the story. Like, what did you think of the story? Like, how kind of the overall plot? Like, yeah.
I like it. I mean, again, I mean, being a fan and defender of the film, I enjoy it. I know a lot of people say it's a general monster on the loose film, and to some degree that's true. But again, too, like I stated a little bit ago, I think there is a major theme at play here, too, that so many people are overlooking when they think about this film and when they watch the film. I'm always amazed at how fast this film is. That if you're not counting credits, the film's actual length is 2 hours, 9 minutes. And for some people, that's too long. I think it feels significantly less than that. I'm always amazed at how fast it is. And a lot of it's because when you enjoy something a lot of times, you're so immersed in it, you kind of lose track of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably what happens with me when I watch this film. As I said here before, on our year-end episode 4 months ago, when we were ranking like our favorite movies of the year, and this for me was number 1, and I said, other than Godzilla vs. Kong, this was the movie I've seen the most the last couple of years. And the viewing here yesterday would have been viewing number of 11 for me, I think, since 21. So I mean, I enjoy it. I have a blast every time I watch the movie. I think it's a lot of fun. Unfortunately, part of me gets a little sad because I still unfortunately think about how terribly underappreciated and unfairly panned this movie has been over the years. I kind of get into that. It's really hard for me to get out of that headspace because I am such a fan of this film, and it always reminds me too of how poorly a number of fans, especially in the early 2000s, had treated me on some message boards when I would talk about how much I enjoyed this film. So unfortunately, it's a little PTSD on some level. I get a little angry and sad, but then I enjoy it though too. Like I said, I like this film. It is truly one of my personal favorite Godzilla movies. It's also one of my personal favorite movies of all time. And I guess I could say that as one of my general overall opinions on this movie as well, is that I think this is a terrific movie that deserves a lot more love than it gets. I love it. It's a really fun film. I have fun with it every time I watch it. Its legacy will always be, I think, shrouded in conspiracies that are totally unfounded.
And controversy.
And this is a film who really a lot of fans, even if you don't like it, you should appreciate it for the fact that you had that huge marketing blitz, tons of product at the time, especially if you were of appropriate age to where you were aware
Name
of what the
recognition.
products were. And then not only that, it helped make Godzilla significantly more mainstream than ever before in this country, ultimately led to where we are now, where you can find some decent amount of Godzilla merchandise at your local brick and mortar stores because it helped to bring him more to the forefront than he ever had been before. It also helped spawn the Millennium series, spawn the Monsterverse. Yes, those in many ways were a response to the backlash of this movie, but still,
I would
without
also
this movie,
I would also say it spawned other various kaiju movies besides
right.
Godzilla, including Pacific Rim.
And even then, it helped to make people aware again, and even more so, of the Japanese Godzilla films. And that
And the whole
companies
kaiju genre.
yeah, and people, some of these media companies over the last 25 years have released Godzilla movies, Gamera movies, other kaiju films, and other tokusatsu films. This again, even if you didn't like this movie, it made people more aware. It brought in merchandise. It brought in releasing.
And to me,
We're living in a golden age of kaiju because of the '98 Godzilla movie.
and two, we wouldn't have such an easy access to any of these kaiju genre movies and shows if it wasn't for the 98 Godzilla. Because beforehand, it was pretty hard to get access to a lot of the Godzilla movies, even some of the other kaiju, like Gamera, for instance. Because, like, I would say after the 98 Godzilla movie, that's, I would say, maybe about a year or so after that is when I discovered the whole Gamera franchise. If it wasn't for the 98 Godzilla movie, I wouldn't have the access to other kaiju movies and tokusatsu.
Yeah, every fan, regardless of what you think about this movie specifically, every single one of us that is a kaiju fan owes a debt of gratitude to this movie. Just because of that. Because, yeah, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't without the 98 movie.
Yeah.
The 98 movie, the shadow it casts is large, for good or ill, if not a combination thereof.
Yeah, we wouldn't have started the podcast 13 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the 98 film, I mean, it is, I forget the term, but it's sort of, it's kind of like a Tom Brady, so to speak, where you have a kind of like what they call a generational player in sports. This Godzilla movie is a generational Godzilla movie. That people, like I said before, fans, I think, really forget that this movie is responsible for so much good within the kaiju fandom in general. Because we certainly would not be living in the era we are in now, in a good sense, without this film. And I think everybody, like I said, for the umpteenth time, even if you hate the film, you still owe a debt of gratitude to this film. Because without it, we would still probably be living in what would be sort of the dark ages where Godzilla movies probably would be sparse. God knows where we don't know if we would have the Millennium Era or the Monsterverse. The merchandising, people in the West would still probably look at Godzilla as nothing more than this goofy kid's stupid product.
We probably wouldn't have gotten a whole lot of the merchandise behind us.
I truly believe we would be more in that deep, dark era, more than likely than we would be now, where there is more genuine respect for this property, and it's because of Godzilla in 1998.
Mm-hmm.
So I love the movie. I will forever love the movie. One of my favorites, and I think its legacy, again, I think more than not is very positive because of everything we've just said here just in the last few minutes
Mm-hmm.
that it's responsible for, and a lot of it is good.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so your final thoughts on the film?
Yeah. My final thoughts on the film, it's kind of with when we started following Godzilla and the other kaiju and stuff with Godzilla versus the Sea Monster back in '92. I would say this one is kind of one of the major fabrics in our fandom to not only Godzilla but for the whole kaiju and tokusatsu, simply because of what we just talked about, giving us easier access to not only Godzilla but to other kaiju, tokusatsu movies and TV shows and all the merchandise. Um, Everything, if it wasn't for the '98 Godzilla movie giving us that easy access to all this, and it's one of the major foundations for me, and so that's probably one of the biggest takes for me is kind of giving us the easy access and giving us so much more Godzilla right after that. But getting back to the movie itself, it's kind of your usual Roland Emmerich, Dean Devlin movie with kind of the whole, how do you say, kind of the big budget disaster sort of movie, which with Godzilla, it's to me, it's kind of a perfect match between the two. Because with Godzilla being a big monster, destroying things, and then with Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin with their movies over the years, they kind of know how to do these big disaster movies. So it's a pretty good match in that way. There are a couple of gripes with their, as far as visual effects. Yeah, kind of done a little bit of that here. The cast, like I said, it's decent. Quite didn't quite expect some of the cast members here and there, but with the story that the movie wanted to tell, I think it's a pretty good, decent cast here. The score, yeah, it's really good for the movie. One of the better ones, I would say. But yeah, overall, it's a really good kaiju movie here. And then, of course, if it wasn't for it, we wouldn't have gotten what we've gotten today. so, so yeah, it's a pretty it still holds up today. With a few things a bit dated, with some of kind of your usual '90s shtick here and there, but I mean, it was made during that time period, so yeah.
And one thing I forgot to mention is that for me, every time I watch this movie, I'm transported to that period of my life in which
Same here.
it was a simpler time. Now, granted, I was a very young teenager, wasn't quite, as aware of what the world was like and all that. You're kind of involved in your own little world, and I'm transported to that back in time of just more innocence and enjoyment, that life seemed more fun and more simpler than it does now. And that's something that I enjoy. And one of the things too, and I cannot believe we both forgot about this, This movie is also very special to me because it is the first Godzilla movie either one of us had seen in theaters at that point. I was far too young to see 1985 in theaters. Same thing with Jason.
Well, I wasn't even around then.
I remember seeing posters of that in movie theaters. That's my faintest memory of that film, but never saw that one in theaters. And so this movie also holds that special place in my heart too. It doesn't just transport me back to a more fun, innocent time in my personal life that makes me forget about just the crap that is the world today. But it's the first Godzilla movie I saw in theaters. And that's something that is also incredibly special to me as well. And that's something I will never, ever allow anybody to take away from me. That this movie, I still remember this moment, and it's when they set up the second fish trap there in Central Park, and Godzilla comes out, and they're trying to get him in the open. He comes out, and he's kind of looking around, and he's kind of inspecting the whole area, and then he kind of crouches down more, and he gets closer to this group of military personnel, and he kind of lets out this little low growl, like, and I remember, and I can see it 100% clear in my mind's eye. Back when that moment happened in the theaters, I remember the bass on the speakers in the theater rumbling so much that the theater shook for a moment because of his growl being so low. I remember that, and I think of that moment every time that moment pops up when I watch this movie. And so that's something I want to say too before we close out here, is that this is very personal to me. It's very, very special. And I think I will forever believe it is an incredible shame that this movie is hated the way that it is. I can understand, I don't expect everybody to like everything. I get that. But again, like I said earlier in this episode, the hatred, the absolute white hot hatred that so many had and still do for this, I think is dumbfounding. I don't get it. And it really makes me sad because I think there is very much a fun, good movie here. And people just, again, for whatever reason, refuse to see it. And again, for the umpteenth time, again, I don't expect everybody to enjoy this. I understand we all have different tastes and stuff, but I think a lot of people don't think for themselves. They want to follow what other people are saying, and more specifically, people that they think have more sway in the fandom than they do. And because they're afraid to be a lone voice to say, no, I object, because they don't want to get criticized and all that stuff, that they hide behind other people, that they don't really come up and sit by themselves and think about it and kind of think, do I like it or not? And if so, why or why not? This whole episode has been both Jason and I basically saying, this is why we enjoy this film. And I think we've made our case very well. I have made my case, I know, plenty of times over the years since we've been doing this podcast. And I really hope, more than anything else, even if you're a hater of this film and you got this far in our episode of our love fest over this film, that hopefully you walk away from this thinking for yourself, that you sit down and you ask yourself, why is it that I've hated this film for 25 years? And you bring up legitimate criticisms. You play in your mind a fake debate that you're having with someone like myself who is a fan of this film. And you pretend we're having a discussion or a debate. And it's like, okay, well, I don't like it because of the design. but then you pretend me in your mind's eye saying, well, what about Shin Godzilla? Shin Godzilla had the mouth on the tail, had lasers shooting out of its spines, had the lower jaw splitting open and all that stuff. What about that? Assuming you're a fan of that anyways. But
or the Netflix anime Godzilla.
yeah, and basically what I'm saying is think for yourself. Really ask yourself the hard questions. And if you still end up disliking the movie, so be it. But at least you thought for yourself and didn't hide behind someone who maybe has more influence in the fandom. That you think for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And for 25 years, this is a movie that I think will forever, even long since we're buried in the ground, will continue to be one of those major points in the Godzilla fandom that will always be not just really controversial, but will, I think, be a starting point for at least those of us in the West that got to enjoy more of Godzilla. And this movie I will go to my grave loving it. As Jason said, it's a foundation for him. It certainly is a foundation for me because, again, this was going into our 6th year of being fans. I mean, for us, when we first became Godzilla fans, almost everything in our personal lives after that was Godzilla.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, for me personally, other than personal hardships online through different groups and stuff, it's been a fantastic 25 years. It still saddens me we never got the trilogy of films from this. But it's a movie that I can now share with my son. He enjoys it. So again, I still get enjoyment out of it, even though, like I said earlier, there are a lot of times when I watch and I'm still reminded of just the unfortunate amount of hatred it gets, but also the way I was treated for quite some time. But that has never stopped me from enjoying it. And so with that, Jason, if you want to do any final housekeeping, we can wrap up.
So final housekeeping, if you're still watching us on YouTube and if you haven't clicked the subscribe button down below, make sure to click that, and as well as smash the like button as well. And you can follow us everywhere in one place at our Linktree page there, right on the screen, /Daikaiju Network. And besides YouTube, we're also on Twitch, Rumble, Facebook, and as well as Odyssey for video platforms. And we're also on the following audio platforms such as Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio, as well as TuneIn. And you can find both audio and video versions of our episodes right on our own website at daikaijunetwork.com.
Thank you so much for listening to us. This will be our only podcast this month. Jason and I need to iron out some when we're going to return. Jason decided to be a lazy American and go take some time off. So, I mean,
well, it's like besides going to Chicago and Michigan every year, it's like I haven't been on an actual vacation on my own for 6 years. So it's like I think it's probably time to do so. So I'm going to do that.
Yeah, All Monsters Attack convention is in Chicago at the Crown Plaza, and seeing some pictures from some of my friends that are there this week, and it's like, oh man, I miss when G-Fest was there.
Yeah. I did see some of those pictures too, and then seeing kind of that whole Balmoral space there that they're using for the convention there.
Yeah,
it's like you have kind of the vendors and then as well as some of the guests there, but then kind of seeing that whole open space, with it being a bit empty, it's like I wish there could have been a little bit more to that to the main area that they're holding that convention there.
Well, my understanding is that is continuing to grow each and every year. So,
well, even with this one, it's its second year. So, but
was it? if my kids weren't in school, I would have gone, because
Yeah.
I remember at one point earlier in the year, even though I'm not going to G Fest this year, I
Both of us, yeah.
legitimately thought for a moment of like taking my son out of school Friday and then having us like go to this, but I thought, I don't know.
Well, I know you and I have talked about like whenever we get back to kind of wanting to go back to a convention, that kind of thought of this being probably we go to this one next and then maybe sort of try to go to G Fest every other year or whichever. So
Yeah.
and just kind of see if that's still kind of being the same, or if they were trying to actually try to make some change. Kind of some of our gripes that we've been saying every year with G Fest, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep an eye on All Monsters Attack, hear their news. I would assume within the next few weeks to a month they'll have more on next year. I'm thinking if they're back in that same general area next year, I may actually try to go next year. So
Yeah.
stay tuned for that.
Yeah, and since I pushed back my Japan trip for another year because I was originally going to go next year, but I decided to push it back to 25. I've been kind of thinking about it along with some other places, but it's a bit early right now. But I know maybe after I get back from my trip here, maybe start thinking a little bit ahead of time.
Yeah. And so with that, thank you so much for watching or listening to us. And we will be back, and God knows when.
Probably in June. So
it'll be June for sure. But
so yeah,
exactly, we have yet to find out.
So yeah, with that, we'll see you guys next time.